There are children who disappear and leave the world searching. And then there are children who were never missing at all, whose absence was constructed, rehearsed, and delivered down a telephone line with enough detail to launch a 5,000-acre search. Javeayah Harris was 4 years old. She loved chickens. She wore pink Minnie Mouse pajamas. And according to the people who were supposed to protect her more than anyone else on Earth, she had already been gone for weeks before anyone outside that house was ever told to look. If you are new here, this is Crimes Records, and what you are about to hear is one of the most quietly devastating cases we have ever covered on this channel. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe and hit the like button. It costs you nothing, and it is the only way stories like Javeayah's reach people who need to hear them. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Not the night of the call. Not the search. The beginning. The part that happened inside a house on Hillsborough Street, while the rest of the world had no idea anything was wrong. 39. Hillsborough Street sits in Aiken County, South Carolina. The family had recently purchased the home. They did not know the neighbors. They did not talk to people in the area. By their own account, they were new to the neighborhood, still learning it, still settling in. Inside that house lived Michelle Herring, Javeayah Harris, and their 4-year-old daughter Javeayah. Javeayah, who went by Jay, was the kind of child people describe in ways that make her absence hit differently. Smart enough to hold a full conversation, curious enough to spend her days near the chicken coop in the backyard, checking on the birds the way only a 4-year-old thinks to do. Her parents suspected she might be on the autism spectrum, but she had not yet been formally evaluated. She had just turned 4. She had her whole life in front of her. Somewhere between the 1st of May and the 15th of June, that life ended. That is the window the arrest warrants establish. A 6-week span during which, according to documents filed by investigators, Javeayah suffered a serious physical injury. The warrants attribute that injury to her mother, Michelle Herring. What the documents describe next is the part that is almost impossible to process. Neither parent sought medical attention for Javeayah after the injury occurred. Not that day. Not the next day. Not the day after that. The legal language in the warrants uses a specific phrase to describe what investigators say followed: circumstances showing an extreme disregard for well-being. That phrase is doing a great deal of work in a very small amount of space, because what it describes is not a moment of panic. It is not a split-second failure. It is a sustained, deliberate choice, made and remade across days and weeks, to do nothing while a 4-year-old child needed help that never came. Some investigative reporting, based on interviews with investigators, has narrowed the probable date of the injury to around June 5th specifically. The arrest warrants use the broader window, so that is what can be stated with certainty. But whether the date was June 5th or sometime in the weeks before it, the math that follows remains the same. Because the emergency call Michelle Herring placed did not come on the day of the injury. It did not come the next day or the week after. It came on June 30th. That is a gap of at minimum 15 days, possibly as long as 25, and depending on where you place the injury within the broader window the warrants describe, potentially closer to 2 months. What was happening inside that house during all of that time? That question does not have a fully public answer yet. The confessions both parents gave to investigators have not been released beyond the summaries contained in the warrant affidavits. But the gap itself is the central fact of this case, because everything that came after, the call, the search, the story about the chickens and the pajamas, was built to cover it. And something was about to force it open, whether anyone inside that house was ready for that or not. To understand the psychology of what those weeks looked like, it helps to understand a pattern researchers who study cases like this one have identified and documented repeatedly. When a child is seriously injured and the person responsible knows that seeking help means explaining what happened, when help and confession become the same act, some people make a choice in that first moment to do nothing. That first choice feels like the hardest one. In the immediate aftermath of what happened, with fear and panic and the weight of what getting help actually means closing in all at once, silence feels like the only option that does not immediately destroy everything. But silence does not hold still. It compounds. On day 1, a parent who brought an injured child to an emergency room might have been able to say it was an accident, that they panicked, that they are here now, and that has to count for something. On day 5, there is a delay to explain. On day 15, the delay is no longer just suspicious. It is its own evidence of something worse than what would have needed explaining on day 1. Each morning that passes raises the cost of the one act that could still have ended this. Not because the truth changes, but because the silence surrounding it grows, and the act of breaking that silence becomes progressively more dangerous to the person living inside it. Researchers who study these cases describe it as a cascading failure of decision-making. The first decision not to seek help is the hardest. Every decision after that is shaped by the one before it. And by the time weeks have passed, the person inside that silence is not weighing the same options they had on day 1. They are weighing a completely different set of calculations, ones that have been altered by everything they did and did not do in the weeks between. That is not a defense of what the warrants describe. It does not make what happened forgivable or even fully explicable. But it is the mechanism underneath the 25 days this case turns on. And here is what makes it even harder to sit with. At some point during those weeks, Michelle Herring sent a text message to a family member that included what appeared to be a video of Javeayah playing at a park, pretending to be pirates. Screenshots of those messages surfaced publicly after the arrests. The authenticity of those screenshots has not been verified by law enforcement, and investigators have not confirmed whether the messages are part of the evidentiary record. But if they are what they appear to be, a mother sending old footage of her daughter to a relative during a period when, according to the warrants, she already knew Javeayah was gone, then the performance did not begin and end with the emergency call. It was happening in private conversations too, with people who had no reason not to trust her. Which brings us to June 30th. By that date, Michelle Herring was 39 weeks pregnant. She was days away from giving birth to her second child, and there was nothing she could do to delay or avoid what that meant. Walking into a hospital to deliver a baby is not a quiet, anonymous event. It is an intake process surrounded by medical staff, social workers, and hospital personnel trained to ask a specific set of questions when a mother arrives. One of those questions, a standard one, the kind no one thinks twice about asking, is simply this: where are your other children? Michelle Herring's medical records would have shown a living 4-year-old daughter. Someone in that delivery room was going to ask about her. And the answer to that question, if it came from the truth, would have unraveled everything that had happened inside that house over the preceding weeks in a setting surrounded by mandatory reporters with legal obligations to act on what they heard. Former Deputy Solicitor for South Carolina's Fifth Circuit, April Sampson, has no connection to this case, but she has prosecuted cases built on similar facts. Her public analysis of the timing is direct and unsparing. Herring was about to go to a hospital. When you go to a hospital to have a child, you are surrounded by people trained to ask where your other children are. If Javeayah had simply never been mentioned, if Herring had walked into that delivery room and no one had thought to ask, the gap might have held a little longer. But that is not how labor and delivery works, especially not when your records show a 4-year-old at home. Sampson's conclusion is the one that lands hardest in the entire public record of this case. Instead of waiting for that moment, instead of walking into a hospital and being asked the question she could not answer honestly, Herring picked up the phone and built a different version of reality. One where Javeayah was missing rather than gone. One where the story started that evening instead of weeks earlier. One where there was already an active police search underway before anyone in that hospital had a chance to ask a single question. A missing child with law enforcement already involved provides a ready-made answer to where your daughter is. It does not require you to explain anything you are not ready to explain, because the explanation already exists. She vanished. They are looking for her. It happened tonight. The call was not about finding Javeayah. It was about having an answer ready for the question that was already on its way. Sampson put it plainly in her public analysis. She said Javeayah was missing and hoped that would be enough for everyone to go away and leave her alone, and believe her. There is a cold precision to that reading that makes it worse rather than better, because it means the call on June 30th was not impulsive. It was not a breakdown. It was, if Sampson's analysis is right, a calculation. One timed not to the injury, not to panic, but to the one event Herring could not control or postpone: the birth of her second child. Now, let's talk about the call itself. The recording runs just over 5 minutes. It is publicly available. And for anyone who has followed this case from the beginning, it is genuinely difficult to listen to, not because it sounds suspicious, but because it does not. Michelle Herring opens by telling the dispatcher she cannot find her child. She gives the address. She says Javeayah was outside playing, that she went in to cook dinner, and that when she came back out, her daughter was nowhere to be found. She sounds afraid. She sounds like a mother. The dispatcher asks what Javeayah was wearing, and Herring answers without a pause. Pink Minnie Mouse pajamas, pink beads in her braids. She is not sure if she had her Crocs on or her play shoes. She says the bath water is already drawn in the tub. Dinner is on the stove. She describes Javeayah asking for permission to keep playing outside before it got dark. A detail so specific, so ordinary, that it does not read like something constructed. It reads like a memory. She mentions the chicken coop as the place she usually finds her daughter. She talks about Javeayah's development, her intelligence, her ability to hold a full conversation. These are the kinds of details a genuinely frightened parent offers to help searchers understand who they are looking for. They humanize the child. They make the picture real. And then, without the dispatcher asking, Herring raises something else. She mentions the people who walk a path behind the house, people she characterizes using a word that implies substance use. She says she has always felt uneasy about them. She says they just purchased the home, do not know the area well, do not talk to the neighbors. She says the area is not good. Behavioral analysts and investigators who study emergency calls often watch for exactly this kind of moment. An alternative suspect introduced unprompted, without any question prompting it, redirecting attention away from the house and towards strangers on a path. In a genuine emergency, a parent's mind racing through worst-case scenarios might land there naturally. In a fabricated one, it is misdirection. Then there is the phone. Herring tells the dispatcher that her phone is not active. She can dial for emergencies, but there is no working number to call her back on. That means the one tool investigators would normally use to follow up in real time, to ask additional questions, to stay in contact during a live search, does not work. Whether that is coincidence or something else, it is part of the record. By the time the call ends, officers are already pulling up to the address. The search that will eventually span 5,000 acres and involve the Federal Bureau of Investigation begins within minutes. And Michelle Herring goes into labor that same night. She gives birth hours after the call is placed, while officers and drones are still fanning out across Aiken County looking for a little girl who, according to the warrants, was nowhere near Aiken County anymore. Javeayah's newborn sibling has since been placed in the custody of a family member. The South Carolina Department of Social Services became involved following the birth, a standard response when a parent faces charges of this severity while a newborn is in their care. A judge noted DSS's involvement during Herring's bond hearing. The search for Javeayah continued for days. Ground units, drones, the FBI, 5,000 acres of Aiken County terrain examined by people who had no way of knowing that the story that sent them there had been constructed to send them in the wrong direction. Every person who walked that grid, every volunteer who drove out to help, every family member who waited for news, all of them were operating inside a story that the warrants now say both parents had already confirmed to investigators was not true. On July 4th, Sheriff Michael Sawyer held a press conference. He told the public that investigators had identified an area of interest outside Aiken County. He would not name it. He asked the public to stay away. He said the investigation had developed this location through the course of the case. At that point, the arrests had not yet been made, and the warrants had not yet been released. The area of interest remained unnamed. We know now where it is, and what it is tells you something about what investigators believe they are looking for. The search shifted north, roughly 2 hours north of Aiken, to Fairfield County, near the Chester County line. The specific location is an area near Debutary Creek, which feeds into Rocky Creek Lake, an 847-acre reservoir on the Catawba River that locals call Stumpy Pond. The name comes from the submerged trees and timber that make the water difficult to navigate. It is the kind of place that is good for fishing and brutal for search teams trying to work below the surface. Sonar is unreliable in water choked with underwater obstacles. Dive operations are dangerous. The terrain surrounding it is dense and remote. There is no cell service in the immediate area. A single access road serves as the only way in and out, and law enforcement restricted it to authorized personnel only. The South Carolina Department of Natural Resources deployed the largest presence at that location. Boats, all-terrain vehicles, a drone team, dive units, and canine teams. The State Law Enforcement Division was on scene. The Fairfield County Sheriff's Office provided perimeter security. Multiple unmarked vehicles were observed coming and going. Rain and storms at various points may have grounded drone operations. The search at Debutary Creek has been described by reporters on scene as methodical, difficult, weather-dependent work, the kind of search that does not move fast and does not offer easy answers. The connection between this location and the parents is not circumstantial in the way some connections in cases like this are. Both Michelle Herring and Javeayah Harris have documented ties to Union County, which borders the search zone. Public records show Herring was named in an eviction case filed by the Union Housing Authority in December of the prior year, resolved the following January. Harris had a separate eviction case from a rental property in the same area from 2023. This is not a random stretch of water chosen without context. It is near where they came from. People generally know the places they return to. Investigators have not said publicly what specific evidence led them to Debutary Creek beyond describing it as an area of interest developed during the investigation. But the arrest warrants state clearly that Herring admitted to disposing of Javeayah's remains at another location, not the home, not the yard, not the woods behind Hillsborough Street, somewhere else entirely. When you combine that admission with both parents' history in the area north of Aiken, the line between those two facts does not require much imagination to draw. On the day of the arrests, members of Javeayah's extended family arrived at the search area near Debutary Creek. They were not there as suspects. They came in tears, looking for information, watching law enforcement work the water 2 hours from the house where their granddaughter, their niece, their family was supposed to be growing up. There are no words adequate to that image. The people closest to Javeayah, the people who loved her and had no knowledge of what had happened to her, standing at the edge of a reservoir watching dive teams go under because the two people who should have protected her led investigators here instead. We are going to pause here for a moment, because this is the part of the case where the two scenes being worked simultaneously deserve to be understood for what they represent. At 39 Hillsborough Street in Aiken County, investigators were returning to the family home with staff from the Aiken County Coroner's Office. At Debutary Creek in Fairfield County, DNR dive teams and canine units were working the water. 2 active scenes, 2 hours apart, different teams doing different work for the same reason. This is also a good time to remind you, if this kind of in-depth coverage is what you come here for, Crimes Records is the place to be. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every time you do, it helps us bring more stories like this one to the people who need to hear them. The return to 39 Hillsborough Street happened more than a week after the original call. Investigators arrived with fresh crime scene tape and staff from the coroner's office, and they worked the property for 4 hours. They searched the woods behind the home. They went inside the house. They worked the ground outside. Reporters on scene described investigators using sifting screens, the kind used to separate soil from small objects, going through dirt methodically, placing yellow evidence number blocks at specific locations. At one point, what appeared to be a dark-colored, deteriorated piece of fabric was recovered. What looked like a shoe was also observed among the items being marked and collected. The presence of the coroner's office at that location carries significant weight on its own. In South Carolina, the coroner is the office responsible for determining the cause and manner of death in cases where a person is no longer living. Their appearance at a home that investigators had already searched once during the initial missing person phase signals something specific about how law enforcement was now viewing 39 Hillsborough Street, not as the place Javeayah disappeared from, as the place where what the warrants describe may have actually happened. The location where an injury occurred that neither parent reported, in a house where a 4-year-old lived until she did not anymore. A high-ranking law enforcement source told local news that the work at the home was evidence collection, distinct from the ongoing search for Javeayah's remains at Debutary Creek. The Aiken County Sheriff's Office declined to confirm or deny that distinction. Their chief deputy said only that this was an ongoing investigation, and that not every detail could be released. That is a legally defensible and procedurally standard response. It is also, in the context of what the public can observe, the kind of statement that tells you more by what it does not say than by what it does. Two simultaneous active scenes. One looking for evidence of what happened to her. One looking for where she is now. Around 100 people gathered on Hillsborough Street that Tuesday evening to watch. Some were neighbors. Some had driven in from across the county. Many added to the growing memorial that had formed around the family's mailbox. Stuffed animals, balloons, candles, Minnie Mouse toys, almost everything in pink. By that evening, the memorial had grown well past the mailbox and onto the grass in front of the property. People were adding to it every day. By 8:40 that night, the investigators on scene gathered in a circle, spoke among themselves for a few minutes, and left. What they found, what it means for the case, and how it connects to the timeline established in the warrants has not been made public. But let's talk about what has been made public, because the arrest warrants themselves contain details that change the shape of this case in ways the original coverage could not. The warrants for both Michelle Herring and Javeayah Harris were released publicly, obtained through a public records request. They are short documents, a few paragraphs each, but what is inside them is precise. The warrant for Herring states that Javeayah suffered an injury resulting from physical conduct attributed to her mother. The warrant establishes the injury window as sometime between the 1st of May and the 15th of June. It states that neither parent sought medical attention for Javeayah afterward, despite knowing she had been hurt. It describes their inaction using the phrase, circumstances showing an extreme disregard for well-being. And then it closes the door on any remaining version of this being a disappearance, stating that this information was obtained through the confessions of both parents, not through forensic evidence alone, and not through witness accounts pieced together after the fact. Both parents sat down with investigators and told them what happened. That is a categorically different case than the one being covered in the days before the warrants were released. Before the warrants, the question was whether the timeline made sense. After the warrants, the timeline had been confirmed by the two people at the center of it. The warrant for Javeayah Harris separates his case from Herring's in a way that matters legally. His warrant states that the injury to Javeayah was caused by her mother, not by him. He is charged because, according to the warrant, he knew about the injury and did not seek medical attention for his daughter. That is a different kind of legal responsibility than being the person who caused the harm directly. Whether a jury ultimately views that distinction, the way the warrant frames it is a question that September and beyond will have to answer. But the distinction exists, and it is part of the record. The warrant filed against Herring for the false report charge includes one additional detail that matters for understanding where this investigation goes next. It alleges that she admitted to disposing of Javeayah's remains at another location, not the home, not the yard, not the surrounding woods, somewhere else entirely. That somewhere else is where the second half of this story now lives, in a reservoir 2 hours north, in water that is difficult to search and harder to recover anything from. Both parents appeared before Magistrate Judge Ronald Thornton on Sunday. Herring at 10:30 in the morning. Harris at 1:30 in the afternoon. Neither had an attorney present. Both were denied bond. The reasoning from the judge was straightforward. The charges they face carry a mandatory minimum of 20 years and a maximum of life. Under South Carolina law, a magistrate does not have the authority to set bond on a charge of that severity. That decision has to wait for a circuit court judge. Their next scheduled court appearance is September 18th at 9 in the morning. What came out during Herring's hearing was small in the legal sense, but it sits strangely next to everything else in the public record. She told the judge she works at Transcom, a customer service company, earning approximately $1,300 every 2 weeks. When asked who else lived in the household, she said the father, and that he worked at DHL. The judge determined her income was too high to qualify for a court-appointed attorney. These are ordinary details, the kind of information you would find in any bond hearing for anyone charged with anything. Two people with jobs and a paycheck and an address and a routine. The kind of household where a 4-year-old's continued absence would eventually need to be explained to someone. A coworker asking how the kids are doing. A relative wanting to visit. A doctor's appointment. A birth. The bond denials establish something about the weight the court is placing on this case from the very beginning. When a magistrate declines to set bond not because of a defendant's character or flight risk, but because the charges themselves carry a sentence that can include life, that is a statement about what the justice system believes it is looking at. Until a circuit court judge addresses the bond question, both parents remain in the Aiken County Detention Center. Given that the next scheduled appearance is not until September, that is more than 2 months of sitting in a cell while the investigation continues to build around them. Evidence collected, warrants potentially expanded, the search at Javeayah Creek either producing results or not. It also means that for more than 2 months neither parent will have a public forum to present their account. Whatever their full confessions contain, beyond the summaries and the warrant affidavits, remains between them, the investigators who took the statements, and eventually whatever attorneys end up representing them. The public has the warrants. The public has the call. The defense has not spoken yet. And in a case carrying this much weight, that silence from the other side is easy to overlook. But it is there. Which is why the legal framing matters and cannot be skipped over. A confession in a warrant affidavit is a statement investigators say a suspect made during questioning. It has not been tested by cross-examination. It has not been evaluated by a jury. Defense attorneys, when retained, may challenge how the statements were obtained, what was actually said versus what was summarized in the warrant, whether the suspects fully understood their rights at the time, and whether the statements were made voluntarily. All of that legal process is still ahead. The standard for an arrest warrant is probable cause, a reasonable belief that a crime was committed and that these individuals committed it. The standard for a conviction is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are fundamentally different bars. The warrants clear the first one. Whether the evidence builds to clear the second is a question that will not be answered until a trial. And trials in cases like this can take a year or more to reach. Both parents are legally presumed innocent until that changes. What the former prosecutor April Sampson has noted about how investigators work a case like this one, even before a body is recovered, is instructive for understanding where the investigation stands now. Investigators are building the timeline through means that do not depend solely on the confessions. They interview extended family members to determine the last time anyone outside the household saw Javeayah in person, on a video call, in a photograph with a timestamp, in any documented form. They compare those data points against what the parents have said in their confessions and against phone location data. A cell phone pinging a tower near Javeayah Creek on a specific date places a device at a location regardless of what anyone says about where they were. A text message sent to a family member at a time that conflicts with a confessor's account of their movements becomes a contradiction on paper. A photograph's embedded metadata showing when it was taken can reveal that an image presented as recent was actually captured weeks or months before the date being claimed. Sampson uses a phrase to describe this category of evidence: facts beyond change. Evidence that the confessions themselves cannot provide, and that defense attorneys cannot easily challenge, because the facts exist in systems and records independent of what anyone has said about them. The confessions give investigators a map. The facts beyond change tell them whether the map is accurate. That is the work still being done. That is what the second phase of this investigation looks like while both parents wait in the Aiken County Detention Center for September. There is a final piece of the public record that has not received as much attention as the warrants or the call, but it belongs in any honest account of this case: the text message screenshots. Reporting from local outlets describes what appeared in those messages: Herring communicating with a family member and sending what looked like an older video of Javeayah playing at a park pretending to be pirates. If those messages are authentic, and if they were sent during the period when the warrants say Herring already knew her daughter was gone, then the fabrication ran deeper than a single emergency call. It extended into private conversations with people who had every reason to believe what she was telling them. People who trusted her with the truth about her daughter because she was her mother. As of this recording, Javeayah Harris has not been found. The search at Javeayah Creek continues. DNR dive teams, boats, drones, and canine units are still working that terrain. Investigators have not publicly confirmed what, if anything, has been recovered at that location. The search at 39 Hillsborough Street has produced evidence that the coroner's office and the investigative team have collected and not publicly described in detail. 2 active scenes. No public confirmation of what either has yielded. A case moving faster than almost anything comparable in recent memory, and still not finished. The community around Aiken County has responded in the way that communities sometimes do when a case reaches them in a way they cannot explain and cannot put down. On Sunday night, before most of the warrant details had been made public, hundreds of people showed up to a candlelight vigil in downtown Aiken. Nobody knew who had organized it. A flyer had circulated online, but when people arrived, no one stepped forward to claim it. So people simply started speaking, standing in front of strangers, talking about how this case had reached them, how they were trying to explain it to their own children, how a little girl they had never met had become the thing they could not stop thinking about. They brought candles. They brought Minnie Mouse balloons. They wore pink. Some of them, after the vigil ended downtown, drove to Hillsborough Street and left those same candles and stuffed animals at the house where Javeayah had lived. The house investigators had already searched and would return to again 2 days later. A restaurant owner in Aiken, Lakumar Axe of Taj of Aiken, prepared 60 meals and drove them out to the search crews working in Fairfield County on the 4th of July. He was not asked. He simply did it. One neighbor who had recently moved to the area near the home described the growing memorial and said something that has stayed with everyone who heard it. "That is all I wanted her to see," the neighbor said. "That no matter what you were born with, no matter what you went through, you are loved. We love you even if we do not know you." A second vigil was scheduled for Thursday evening at the event center on Shiloh Heights Road. Attendees were asked to bring their own candle. It was expected to end with a walk to the memorial at Javeayah's home. There is something worth sitting with at the end of a case like this one. The vigils, the 60 meals, the memorial in pink that keeps growing past the mailbox and onto the grass. A community building something around the memory of a child most of them never met, because the people who were supposed to protect her more than anyone else are the ones now behind bars. It is not justice. It cannot undo anything. It cannot bring Javeayah back or give the people who loved her what they actually need. But it is the only thing available right now, and the people of Aiken County are holding on to it with everything they have. Here is where the case stands. Both Michelle Herring and Javeayah Harris remain in custody without bond. No attorneys had been appointed or retained as of the last hearing. Their next court date is September 18th. Additional charges remain possible, according to the sheriff's office. The search at Debutary Creek continues with the full weight of DNR, SLED, and local law enforcement behind it. Investigators returned to 39 Hillsborough Street with coroner staff and spent 4 hours collecting evidence whose significance has not been publicly confirmed. The former prosecutor who analyzed this case noted that investigators are building a timeline through facts beyond change, cell records, location data, timestamps, and documented communications that exist independent of what anyone has confessed or denied. The gap between what happened and when anyone outside that house found out was always going to close. The only question was what would close it, the truth or a story. According to the warrants, Herring and Harris chose the story. The story held for 25 days. It held through the duration of a 5,000-acre search. It held through a birth, a vigil, a community in mourning. And then it did not hold anymore, because some things cannot be held forever, and a 4-year-old girl in pink Minnie Mouse pajamas deserved better than to be hidden. Javeayah Harris was loved. She is still loved. By people who never had the chance to know her. By a community that put on pink and stood in the dark, holding candles for a child whose name they had only learned days before. By grandparents and aunts and uncles who drove 2 hours north to stand at the edge of a reservoir and wait for something no family member should ever have to wait for. She deserved better. She deserved the life that was supposed to be ahead of her. And the least the rest of us can do, the very least, is make sure she is not forgotten. If you have any information related to this case, please contact the Aiken County Sheriff's Office or SLED's tip line. If this is the first video of ours you have found, go back and watch the previous episode. It covers the early search, the neighborhood, the sheriff's press conference, and the full context for everything you just heard here. And if you have been watching Crimes Records for a while and you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. Like this video, Leave a comment telling us what part of this case you cannot stop thinking about, and subscribe so you do not miss the next update. This case is still moving. The moment something breaks, we will be here. Rest easy, Javeayah.